I was not looking for love that morning. I wore my familiar dark blue suit, adjusted my tie in front of the mirror in the quiet hotel room, and thought about ordinary things: the presentation, the handshakes, the possibility of signing another contract. My life was a series of neatly arranged plans, like calendar lines on my phone. There was no room for surprise, and certainly no room for destiny. Seattle greeted me with a gentle cold and a silver-gray sky. The convention center stood tall among blocks of glass and steel, a place where people came to talk about the future, about profit, about growth. I blended into the stream of people passing through the revolving doors, hearing the rhythm of shoes on stone, the smell of dark roasted coffee in the air. Everything happened exactly as I expected: organized, orderly, controllable. My name is Jacob Holloway, 40 years old, married, 2 children, a house in the suburbs with a lawn trimmed every weekend. I am the kind of man society can predict: works hard, comes home on time, causes no trouble. I am proud of that. Loyalty is not an effort, it is instinct. I have never given myself the opportunity to think another road might exist. But if I am honest, there has always been a quiet space walking beside me. It is not big enough to destroy a marriage, not clear enough for me to question it. It is like a locked room in a house. You know it exists, but you choose not to open it because everything still functions fine. I call it fatigue, pressure, the price of adulthood. I have never called it absence. I received my name badge, clipped it onto my jacket, and looked at the long schedule ahead. A series of seminars, quick meetings, a networking lunch. I had done this hundreds of times. I knew how to smile, how to listen, how to make others trust me. I knew how to become the best version of Jacob Holloway in everyone's eyes. The escalator carried me to the main floor where the crowd gathered like a river. I felt the familiar confidence return, the armor of a grown man. If someone had asked me at that moment whether I was happy, I would not have hesitated. I had everything people dreamed of: a loving family, a stable career, a name heavy enough to open many doors. I believed my life would continue like that, smooth and understandable, until my hair turned grayer and the kids moved out. I believed great tremors belonged only to youth, and I had passed that road with dignity. I was not searching for anything more. I had done my part. I walked into the hall and chose a seat near the aisle. The lights dimmed, the large screen began to glow. I placed my phone face down on the table, took a deep breath, ready for a productive day. There was no omen, no intuition, no mysterious voice speaking inside my head. There was only a man who believed he understood his life. And I was wrong. I saw her before I understood who I was seeing. It happened during the first break of the morning, when the crowd spilled into the lobby as if the entire building had exhaled at once. Conversations burst open, polite laughter, hands extended with business cards. I moved with that momentum too, leaving my seat, adjusting my cuffs, letting my body operate on habits that had been programmed for years. The smell of coffee pulled me toward the service counter in the middle of the hall. A line curved around the tall, round tables. I stood at the end, took out my phone to check emails, quickly replied to a message from my wife asking how my morning was going. I typed, "All good. The conference started. I'll call when I'm done." An answer from a good man. Right role, right place. And then I looked up. She stood a few meters away from me, slightly to the right, doing nothing special, talking to no one, just holding a cup of coffee with both hands as if warming herself. The light from the glass wall behind her created a faint outline in her hair, a detail so small I should not have noticed. But I did. I knew at that moment something unusual was happening inside me. Not the kind of attraction of desire, not a man's curiosity toward beauty. It was deeper and quieter, like memory, like a song I once knew but had forgotten for a very long time. A married man should not look at a stranger for too long. I understood that as clearly as I knew my own name. I had lived 40 years without getting into trouble because of eyes. I knew how to respect boundaries. I was proud of my discipline. Yet I kept looking.
There was something about the way she existed in space that made every other sound lower.
Not because she tried to draw attention. On the contrary, she was almost transparent. That was what confused me. How could someone who did not try pull me out of my familiar world so easily? Then she looked up. Our eyes met, and I felt as if I had missed a step on a staircase. No one smiled. No one nodded. There was no social signal. Just two people looking at each other longer than necessary, as if both were checking something neither dared to say aloud. My heart reacted before reason could enter. A strong beat spread across my chest, waking me from the role I had been wearing all morning. I realized I was breathing shallowly, as if the air around her had a different weight. I looked away first. I stared at my phone screen even though there were no new notifications. I took a sip of coffee even though it was still too hot. I did everything a man needs to do when he wants to prove he is completely normal. But I was not normal. I felt an invisible door open somewhere inside me, revealing the room I had kept locked for years. I did not know what was in it, only that I could no longer pretend it did not exist. The line ahead moved. I stepped forward, hearing my heartbeat gradually return to its old rhythm. But the echo remained, like a bell that had rung and could not be taken back. I told myself it would pass. Just a temporary reaction. Everyone has moments like that, and adults know how to put them down. I am good at putting things down. I have put down many dreams, many impulses, many younger versions of myself. I believed I could put this down too. I believed that once I returned to the hall, sat in my chair, continued listening, my life would close back into place. I almost believed it. Until I realized that even after turning away, I still knew exactly where she was standing in the room. And some part of me did not want to forget. We talked. If you look from the outside, it was the most harmless thing that could happen between two adults at a professional conference. No background music, no special lighting, just two people standing beside a tall table, among dozens of similar conversations happening around us. I had promised myself I would not go near her. That promise had been made only minutes earlier, when I was still trying to convince myself that the feeling before was just a nervous confusion. I could return to my seat, continue listening, go back to the familiar version of myself. That was the plan. But somehow my feet carried me to a distance close enough to be polite. I don't remember who spoke first. Maybe it was me, maybe it was her. Maybe the conversation simply began with a very safe question. How's the conference for you? The words slipped out gently, as if they had been prepared in advance. Nothing bold, nothing crossing lines. She looked at my name badge and said, Jacob. The way she pronounced my name was no different from anyone else. But when I heard it, I felt as if I had just been called back from somewhere very far away. A familiarity so unreasonable that I had to keep my face calm so it would not show. We talked about work, where she was from, where I was from. Flights, weather, tight schedules. Every topic was neutral, clean, appropriate for two strangers who had no right to dig too deeply into each other's lives. And that was what frightened me. There was no fire, no electricity, no sign of the kind of emotion people usually warn about. If someone had filmed that moment, they would not find evidence of guilt. We stood at a perfect distance. My arms stayed close to my body. My gaze did not fall anywhere it shouldn't. I was doing everything right. So why did I feel like I was walking along a fragile border? She laughed when I told a small story about almost missing my flight. A soft laugh, not dramatic, but I felt it touch me deeper than it should have. I began to realize the problem was not in what we were saying. The problem was in the silence between sentences. Those pauses were not empty. They were filled with an understanding that was hard to explain, as if both of us could hear another layer of sound beneath the conversation. I had never experienced this with anyone. Even with my wife, our love had been built over time, through choice, through effort. Here, everything appeared without construction. I found myself nodding, answering, asking questions, but at the same time observing myself from the outside, astonished at the ease of the connection. How could a complete stranger make me feel so clearly seen? There was a moment, very brief, when we were both quiet. The crowd around us seemed to blur. I looked into her eyes and the thought appeared, without permission. I know her. Not know in the sense of information, not biography, but know in the way one recognizes a home. My heart tightened. I checked the distance between us again. Still safe. No contact. Nothing I would have to confess later. I clung to those facts like a man gripping a railing. She asked which session I would attend next. I answered, hearing my voice remain steady. Part of me hoped the conversation would end before I lost control of my thoughts. And then, as if we both sensed something had gone far enough, we nodded lightly. Nice to meet you, Jacob. Nice to meet you. That was all. No exchange of numbers, no plan, no reason to meet again. A perfect conversation. I watched her walk away, blend into the crowd, and felt something inside me also leave its old position. I could not name it, but I knew it had crossed a threshold. I was still standing there, the coffee cold in my hand, realizing a truth that sent a chill through me. I had never touched her, but my soul had. I have never betrayed my wife. The thought appeared in my mind like a defense, even though no one had accused me. I sat back in my seat in the hall, the lights dimmed, the host's voice echoed from the stage, and I tried to breathe like a completely innocent man. I did nothing wrong. I repeated it as if repetition could turn it into a shield. I had not touched her, had not asked for contact information, had not made promises. I behaved properly, even left at the right moment. If morality were a checklist, I had just marked every box. So why did my chest feel so heavy? The screen in front shifted slides. People around me started typing, flipping notebooks, whispering professional comments. I followed, forcing myself back into the familiar rhythm of the world. This was where I belonged. Logic, work, plans. Not an eye. I tried to focus on each word from the speaker, but they flowed past my ears like water. Every time I thought I had grasped the point, the image of her returned, gentle yet impossible to remove. Not her face, but the feeling, that inexplicable peace. I hated it. I hated that something so fragile could shake me more than any temptation I had ever imagined. If it were desire, I would know how to handle it. I could extinguish it with reason, with images of my family, with consequences. But this was not desire. This felt like truth. And I did not know what to do with truth. I leaned back in my chair, feeling cracks forming in my armor. Jacob Holloway, the reliable man, the exemplary husband, the father present at every parent meeting. I had built myself from thousands of correct choices, only to be knocked down by a conversation that lasted less than 10 minutes. I wanted to stand up and leave the building. The idea came fast and strong. I could call a taxi, go to the airport early, return home, hold my wife, kiss her hair, tell myself everything was still the same. I could bury this moment before it took root. But I remained seated. Because running away from a place does not mean running from what has awakened inside you. I realized the real fear was not losing my family. I love them. That has not changed. The fear is that now I know there exists another kind of connection, another depth of myself I have never touched. I am afraid of living the rest of my life pretending I never saw it. It's just imagination, I told myself. You're exaggerating. People meet others who move them. It will pass. My reason sounded convincing. It had experience. It had kept me safe for years. But deep in my chest, another voice whispered, "No, this is recognition." I closed my eyes for a few seconds, as if darkness could erase her. I wished I could return to the morning, before stepping into the coffee lobby, before looking up, before knowing. When I opened my eyes, I was still there. Still the hall, still the speech, still the life I understood. Nothing had changed outside. Only me. I took a deep breath, trying to accept something I had never had to learn. A person can be loyal, but the heart does not always obey. And realizing that was what terrified me. I wish I could go back to being the man from that morning. The man who walked through the revolving doors of the convention center with a leather briefcase, a clear schedule, and a neatly arranged heart. The man who believed the world operated by choice, that as long as you behaved correctly, everything would stay in its place. I used to believe that. The presentation on stage continued. Charts, numbers, applause rising at the right moments. I still sat there, occasionally nodding, sometimes writing meaningless words in the notebook in front of me so no one would realize I was drifting far away from this room. I was no longer fighting the feeling. I was tired of denying it. The more I tried to extinguish it, the clearer it became, like an object rising from water. I remembered her eyes when we said goodbye. Not holding on, not asking. There was not a trace of possession in them, only a quiet acknowledgement that something had happened. Maybe I imagined it. I held on to that possibility like a final float. Human beings are very good at creating stories when they need to. Maybe I was romanticizing an ordinary moment because my life had become too even. Maybe I wanted to feel alive. But if it was only imagination, why did it feel this real? I have been moved by other women before. I am not a saint. But those feelings always had a beginning and an end. They were like small fires, flaring up and dying out. I knew how to turn away, and once I turned, they disappeared. This was different. It did not burn. It existed. I could sit here, among hundreds of people, and still feel it like a pulse running parallel to my own heart. Not loud, not demanding, but terrifyingly steady. A word appeared in my mind, at first very softly, as if afraid I would chase it away. Twin flame. I almost laughed at its seriousness. Me, Jacob Holloway, a man who lives by logic and contracts, sitting in a business hall thinking of something that sounded like it came from a spiritual book. I wanted to reject it immediately. But the word stayed. Not because it was mystical, but because it explained the recognition I could not name. The way time distorted when we looked at each other. The way I felt seen through without being invaded. I had never thought someone could touch the deepest part of me without touching my body. I rested my hand against my forehead, exhaled, trying to keep my face normal. The man next to me was busy photographing slides, completely unaware that my world had just changed shape. I did not want this word to be true. Because if it was, then I had to accept that the meeting was not random, that there were threads existing beyond plans, beyond marriage, beyond every safe definition I had used to build my life. And that meant I was not in control of everything the way I thought. I swallowed. If she was my twin flame, then what was my role? What was I supposed to do with a truth like that? Chase it? Or simply watch it pass like a shooting star I had no right to wish upon? I had no answer. I only knew one thing. From this moment on, I could no longer consider my life simple. A new depth had opened, and even if I chose to turn away, I would still know it was there. I wish I had never known. But I did. Love may be destiny, but action is always a choice. I carried that sentence in my mind when the session ended and the crowd began to stand. Chairs shifted, conversations rose, people opened their phones, checked schedules, found each other for lunch. An ordinary day continued, as if nothing had cracked open in my chest for the past few hours. I stood up too. My body operated almost automatically, gathering my notebook, clipping my pen, adjusting my jacket. If anyone looked, they would see Jacob Holloway, calm, professional, reliable. No sign of a man standing at the border of his life. I stepped into the lobby, and then I saw her. She stood near the large glass wall, noon light stretching across the floor in pale strips. Still alone, not rushing, not searching, simply existing in a way that made my heart tighten. The distance between us was not far. If I walked straight, maybe 10 steps. 10 steps. I could say goodbye more properly. I could ask which city she lived in. I could offer my business card like hundreds of people around me were doing. No one would suspect anything. It was normal in this environment. It might even be rude not to. My reason began building legitimate excuses, brick by brick, forming a path that looked completely harmless. I would not do anything wrong. I would only open the possibility of talking in the future. Friends, colleagues, a professional connection. No one would be hurt. But I knew I was lying. Not to the world. To myself. I knew that if I walked toward her, if I allowed myself to hold this thread, it would not stop at a business card. I had felt its depth too clearly. Things like this do not arrive to become polite acquaintances. They arrive to change you. My heart pounded harder as I imagined standing before her again. She would look at me, perhaps with that calm gaze, and I would know she understood too. That with just one small gesture, we would step into a story I was not sure I was brave enough to live. I wanted it. The truth was sharp and merciless. I wanted to know what would happen if I released my old life and followed that call. I wanted to see the end of the road. I wanted to live once more, not as a responsible man, but as a man on fire. God, I wanted it. And that was exactly why I had to stop. I stood still in the flow of people, feeling two forces pulling me in opposite directions. On one side was my family, the years of building, the trusting eyes of the woman waiting for me at home. On the other side was something new, alive, so vast it nearly suffocated me. There was no painless choice. I inhaled deeply. I realized that maturity is sometimes not doing what you want, but understanding why you cannot do it. I could live my whole life without knowing what that feeling was, and I would still be a good man. But now I knew. And my responsibility was heavier because of it. She was still there, only steps away. If she looked toward me right now, I might lose. I did not believe I was that strong, so I turned away first. I turned my body and walked in the opposite direction, each step like tearing from flesh. I did not run. I was not dramatic. I was simply a man leaving a possibility. I don't know if she saw me. I don't know if she understood. I only know that if I stayed 1 second longer, I would no longer be Jacob Holloway, the man I had promised to become. So I left, carrying a sadness no one in that building could see. Leaving did not make the feeling disappear. I realized it almost immediately, when the elevator doors closed and the metal reflection of my face became clearer than any thought. I still looked like myself, the neat suit, the steady eyes, the man who knew what he was doing. But beneath that surface, something had shifted position. I thought turning away would bring relief, that once physical distance was created, the rest would automatically adjust. I had believed in that mechanism my entire life. Stay away from danger, and you will be safe. The elevator descended floor by floor, and I still carried her. Not her image, not her voice, but awareness. Like a door in my mind had opened and could not be closed, no matter how many times I turned my back. I now knew I was capable of feeling that, and that knowledge could not be taken back. I stepped outside the building. The air was colder than I expected. The city remained loud, cars kept moving. Life continued indifferently. No one knew what I had just refused. No one knew what I had just saved. I wasn't sure either. I walked a few steps without direction, just to keep my body moving. I wanted to believe my decision was right, that time would turn the encounter into a small memory, then fade like everything else. But deep inside, I understood an uncomfortable truth. Some things do not come to stay. They come to awaken. I did not lose her because I never had her. But I lost the old version of myself, the man who believed the heart could be managed like a schedule. I was no longer innocent. I wondered whether she felt the same, whether inside that building, among other conversations, she knew I had just walked away with a war in my chest. I had no right to expect her to understand. I did not even have the right to expect her to remember. But a selfish part of me still hoped. Hoped that when I turned away, she had watched. I stopped at a street corner, looking at people passing by. I realized I could still continue my old life. I could go home, have dinner, listen to my children talk about school, lie beside my wife in the familiar room. Nothing prevented me from being a good man. Except now, I would be a good man who knew he had seen something else. And that knowledge would stay with me for the rest of my life. I inhaled deeply, letting the cold sharpen me. I did not regret my decision. If I had to do it again, I would probably still turn away. I knew the consequences of stepping forward could destroy too many things. But understanding that did not make the sadness smaller. I thought of her the way one thinks of a door leading to another world. Not to walk through it, but to know it exists. Perhaps this meeting was not sent for me to change my life. Perhaps it was sent for me to change myself. I was no longer asleep inside my assumptions. I no longer believed love had only one form, that loyalty meant never being shaken. I had been shaken, and I was still loyal. Both existed together, and learning how to carry them in the same heart was my new trial. I stood there a little longer, then finally turned back toward the hotel. Each step slower, heavier, but clearer. I had not chosen her. But I was no longer the man who had never met her. I came home that night. A late flight, the city lights retreating beneath the wings, and I sat there with the feeling that I had traveled very far, even though the geographic distance was only hours. I had left home hundreds of times for work, but never returned with a different heart. My phone vibrated in my hand as the plane descended. A message from my wife. "Have you landed?" Along with a familiar heart emoji. I looked at it longer than usual, as if reading a language I had just relearned. "I'm almost home," I replied. And I knew I was telling the truth. The arrivals hall was crowded, white lights, announcements echoing. I pulled my suitcase through familiar corridors, moving toward the parking lot where my real life was waiting. There was no dramatic soundtrack, no sign that a man had just passed through an inner turning point. Just a husband going home. When I opened the door, I heard the television from the living room, my children's feet running across the wooden floor. My wife stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, smiling the way she always did when I returned from a trip. I hugged her. A normal hug, but I held it longer. I felt the familiar warmth, the familiar scent, the stability we had built over the years. I did not feel deceit in my arms. I still loved her. That was clear and undeniable. But my love now had another dimension. I sat at dinner with my family, listening to my children talk about a test, about a small argument at school. I smiled, asked questions, participated as I always had. No one suspected anything. I was still their Jacob. And I was also the Jacob who had seen that door. The difference was, I was no longer afraid of it. I understood that meeting her had not come to destroy what I had. It came to show me how vast the human heart could be. That I could experience a profound stirring and still choose to stay. I used to think loyalty meant never being called by anything else. I was wrong. Loyalty is hearing the call and deciding where you belong. That night, lying beside my wife, I looked at the ceiling and remembered those eyes. Not with the desire to possess, not with regret, but with gratitude. Because she had allowed me to meet the deepest part of myself. I don't know if we will ever meet again. Maybe not. Maybe our story exists only within a few minutes between two breaks of a conference. But that does not make it smaller. Some encounters do not need to last to become eternal. I turned to the woman sleeping beside me. I gently touched her hand, a silent reminder of the choice I had made. No one forced me. No one watched. I was here because I wanted to be. And for the first time, I fully understood the value of that word. Stay. I closed my eyes, carrying both truths within me, that I had met my twin flame and that I had not followed her. Two things that seemed contradictory, yet formed the man I was at this moment. Not perfect, but awake. And somehow, I thought that was enough.